Okay, so we were discussing about the shear walls. Now, most of the times, I mean, for very tall buildings, it is shear walls are most the buildings are essentially cast like shear wall buildings, structural wall buildings, uh, with without any frame action, so to say. So it is much easier casting entire building with with structural walls with openings pre-decided. I mean, particularly this is very common when you have a very regular kind of building like a hotel building or a office building where the partitions, cabin sizes are all of standard type, and it can all be designed fixed in plan, and everything can go from very easily from floor to floor, and the same formwork just keeps on raising, and you can actually cast the walls, structural walls, very easily, and the openings, etc., wherever required for the doors and windows, they are provided. And as an opening in the shear wall itself. So obviously when you provide the opening, then there is an issue, solid structural wall versus walls with openings. So there is a specific, I mean, there is a requirement. I mean, you cannot have walls without openings if it is entirely, if the structure is entirely based on structural walls. So you cannot just have opaque walls and construct the entire building. So it has to have openings. The other one is when you combine, it is called the dual system. When you combine structural walls with ductile frames, reinforced concrete frames, moment resistant frames. So this is very common. You can get the advantage of both the systems. Shear structural walls can provide, can greatly enhance the stiffness and strength, and also ductility, and uh, moment resistant frames can provide the necessary uh, opening wherever you need, and without any difficulty at all, and at the same time they also provide sufficient mechanisms for energy dissipation during a very strong earthquake event, and without actually posing any hazard to life. The structural collapse can be avoided. It can be properly designed. So now both the things, they require combination. First of all, these walls with openings, they are also sometimes known as coupled structural walls. And obviously this ductile frame also has to be coupled, it has to be integrated with the structural walls, so it has to have this connection with a very strong beam, uh, connecting the frame with the wall, and that obviously has to be able to it has to be designed properly so that it can it can effectively transfer the forces that are coming on the walls, and transfer the deformation and the associated stress resultants. And it has to be designed in such a way that this beam that is connecting, the damage happens here. So that's very crucial, because this coupled shear wall, when we provide opening, let me just take you through an example. Let's use this space here. That will explain it clearly. What do we mean by coupled shear wall? So let's say this is a structural wall. Please pardon this interchangeability of usage, structural wall and shear wall. Our code refers to it as a shear wall, but a more proper usage of term would be structural wall. So for example, I can provide openings in the walls. Okay, so not bad. It's morning cold, the hands are freezing. Uh, Degrees of freedom are very restrained. So let's say we have a opening here, another opening here, another opening here, and another opening here. And right. So you can look at it like this is large opening area, so effectiveness of this particular, in these two lines, there is very little material, so to say. Now this is of course a solid structural wall, this portion, and this portion is also a solid structural wall. Right? And I can also talk of this as a solid structural walls. Now what happens to this portion here? these are the coupling beams. So different shear wall. So this is shear structural wall 1. I can say that this is structural wall 1. This is structural wall 2, and this is again structural wall 3. And all these structural walls, they are coupled by these beams. These are openings. So this is opening, 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 this is opening. Right? So once we provide these openings, then these structural walls, we can think of these as independent structural walls, and they are coupled by these interconnecting beams. So these are called the coupling beams, and obviously these are required. The behavior of this system, structural wall system, will depend on how what is the spacing between these openings. So what is how the openings are spaced across, because and what is the strength of this coupling beams. So as you can see, these are going to be there is really lot of scope of increasing the depth of the beam here. So these beams can be very deep, so they are very short in general, very short span beams, and very deep beams, so very high stiffness and flexural rigidity. And but the point is they are to be designed such that if at all inelastic deformations happen, these should be concentrated here, and more importantly, these should not fail in shear. I mean, you can notice that it's a very deep beam. These are very deep beams, so the shear deformations are also going to be significant, and it has to be protected against shear deformation, failure against shear. So again, you need to define the capacity. What is the moments? What are the moments that are coming on to be transferred here? And according to those moments, again, if you look at it, this is going to be like a beam column junction kind of a situation. The moments are going to be, the action is going to be like this. On these beam sections. So they are going to be very heavy shear force, and the adequate shear reinforcements have to be provided so that we do not see premature failure in shear of those locations. Otherwise, entire advantage of providing shear structural walls goes out for a toss. You cannot really derive much benefit of providing structural walls. And what do we do here? I mean, we can make use of the advantage of these huge concrete mass that we have here. So shear strength, shear capacities can be enhanced by providing these kind of diagonal reinforcements in these coupling beams, and there is sufficient space available for anchorage of these diagonal reinforcements. In the they can be continued absorbed in the structural walls, adjacent structural walls, and these provide sufficient strength. Obviously, in addition to the usual longitudinal and transverse reinforcement, these diagonal reinforcements across the openings across these short beams into the adjacent structural walls provide adequate anchorage and adequate shear resistance, and you can find the details of these uh, special detailing for structural walls around openings in the code 13920 for ductile detailing of shear walls, as it is mentioned there. And these will often provide the sufficient margin of safety against shear, so that uh, inelastic deformations in the structural walls happen only in the flexural mode, and that will be taken care of development of very large plastic hinge, and it will be able to dissipate lot of seismic energy, lot of scope for absorbing dissipating energy, and through plastic deformation and flexural deformation at the base, and the structure would in general behave very well. And similarly, when we talk of structural walls and ductile connect it with the ductile moment resistant frames, then the structural walls have to be connected with the analysis. First of all, the analysis is based on force transfer. So this is the wall, and this is the frame. So what is done in analysis, lateral load analysis, is uh, you separate out the walls, total wall area, and interconnect them at each floor level by these rigid links to ensure that the deformations are compatible. The lateral deformation at each floor levels for uh, the frame as well as for the wall, they are uh, enforced, compatibility is enforced, and rotations are of course free. They can rotate by different amounts. That is because of the difference in behavior of this ball. Wall will behave like a vertical cantilever. It will be entirely flexural deformation, and frame will deform more like a shear deformation. Floor to floor, it will be like a shear deformation. So I'll tell you what it looks like. So for each floor, it is going to deform like this, right? So if you look at it, for each floor level there is a constant, there is a some drift here happening. So this is the frame deformation, and the wall on the other hand would just deform like a cantilever. So this is the deformation of a wall. So you can see that in the beginning at the bottom portion, the both frame and wall, they cooperate together in resisting the deformation. The deformations are small, so there is not much of a difference in interaction. But as you go up, the difference in the deformation pattern is very different, and then uh, they actually try to push against each other. Uh, so the interacting forces are opposite are of opposite signs. So at the bottom they are of the same. The action is in the same direction. They are in withstanding the uh, external force in the same way. But as you go up the towards the top, the interaction forces between the frame and shear wall, they would be of opposite signs. So they would be pushing against each other, and that is a very critical important thing to notice about this interaction between frame and moment resistant frame and shear wall. Earlier times, when these systems were first developed and not enough computing resources were available, at that time it used to be a common practice that wall would be designed for 70%, 70 to 75% of lateral load taken by wall, and 30 to 25%, or I would rather say the other way around, 25 to 30% of the lateral force. Okay, force is a more appropriate term. Lateral force is taken by the frame. So this is very early old practice. Limited computational. There were limited computational resources. So it makes so in the case of that, when the computational resources were limited and the analysis could not be carried out in great detail of the combined behavior, so it was a very handy procedure that if W is the 0.1 W, if 0.1 W is the total weight coming on the lateral load, then 70% of that, so 0.07 W is taken by the wall, and 0.03 W is taken by the frame. And then individually design the frame and the wall separately for these loads, and be happy. So very simple indeed, and works fine most of the cases. But the problem is these numbers are not constant. I mean, these are some magic numbers which are on the average kind of numbers that you see. And particularly when the plastic hinges develop, inelastic deformations happen, then the load distribution is not really in this strictly followed by these norms. I mean, structural behavior will of course happen according to its own character. It doesn't structure doesn't honor what you have assumed in analysis. I mean, it will do what how it is constructed, and according to what it has been constructed, and how it has been constructed, and how it has been detailed, structure has been detailed. So the behavior and the actual load distribution under the earthquake loading may not be consistent with this ratio, and therefore the behavior may be sometimes unexpected or even suboptimal, particularly when, as I showed here, if care is not taken to avoid the shear failure. So, premature shear failure, because the problem with shear failure is it has very, very limited capacity for energy dissipation. The energy dissipation, uh, it drops very quickly. On the other hand, if it is in the flexural mode, you have a very stable hysteresis and you can keep on dissipating energy in every cycle of vibration. And in shear failure, inelastic shear deformation, every cycle of vibration, your energy dissipation keeps on decreasing very rapidly, and very soon there will not be enough. There you cannot. There will not be enough material to take any shear anymore. So it's extremely important that shear failure has to be avoided, and that cannot happen if without taking care, without taking into account the interaction between both the structural systems, particularly in the nonlinear when the plastic hinges begin to develop and the non-linearities, inelastic deformations are taken accounted for, then you get the more rational picture of the actual force distribution, what is the contribution of the structural walls, and how much portion, how much force is taken up by the structure, by the moment resistant frame. And once you do that, then of course, and keep in mind about the capacity design, that shear capacities have to be much more than the flexural capacities as corresponding flexural capacities. And I mean, there is nothing about mechanics here. Uh, if you go by the mechanics, then moment and shear have a definite relationship, and that is why uh, if we provide exactly that, then obviously shear is going to fail, and will have a catastrophic collapse. So the capacity to withstand shear has to be much more than what can be, what the shear force is expected or is calculated based on the maximum flexural capacities, corresponding to maximum flexural capacities. And that's very critical, and that is why capacity design is the way to go for seismic design. You need to estimate the capacities based on what are the maximum flexural capacities, and corresponding to those flexural capacities, you estimate what is the shear demand coming on, and then provide more than what is the demand, maximum shear demand coming on. And then that will ensure that the inelastic deformations happen only in the flexural mode, and that will lead to a very stable hysteresis. Like so if you look at the hysteresis, so the flexural hysteresis may look like, it's not. So like this. So these are the deformation, and these are the lateral force. So this is what the flexural hysteresis, inelastic deformation in flexure will look like if it has been designed, if designed and detailed to in a ductile behavior. But if I look at the shear deformation, then it's going to be So as you can see, the stiffness also decreases, strength also decreases, and the energy dissipated, which is the area under this hysteresis curve, that is much smaller than what you can achieve in the case of flexural deformation, in elastic flexural deformation. So that is why it is important that you need to ensure ductile detailing, and the ductile detailing not only goes for the shear reinforcement, it also goes for the longitudinal flexural reinforcement and also transverse reinforcement in the walls, and sufficient usual ductile detailing as we discussed for the beams, similar kind of ductile detailing, and spacing, particularly spacing of transverse reinforcement, to again to prevent uh, shear failure, and also for confining, because as I said earlier, we need to we are looking for development of plastic hinges in the walls, and that will need large curvature ductilities, and those curvature ductilities can only be achieved uh, if we can take the benefit of confined concrete. And for confinement, proper confinement of the concrete, the transverse reinforcement has to be in proper spacing. I mean, more very closely spaced transverse reinforcement, and the longitudinal reinforcement also has to be in at least two layers, right? So it is not. I mean, the bending is of course in this plane. So bending is like this. So you may say that if this is, I can only provide, it may be sufficient if I provide reinforcement in the center line. Nothing, you can probably argue like that. That is going to be providing the carrying out this resist, helping in this moment. But this moment will of course have a strain distribution like this, and this center portion, if you provide uh, so in the case of if I say this is the cross section of the wall, and if I provide reinforcement only in the middle portion, technically that should be able to take care of the moment. If I provide longitudinal reinforcement only like this, then it should be able to take the uh, flexural strains which are of this type. So they should be able to do that, but then it doesn't help you in confining of the concrete. So you need to provide reinforcement in multiple layers, and then to provide lateral transverse ties as required, in as closely as required, to ensure that this concrete core, this remains confined concrete, and that is going to provide high ductility, or I would say large curvature ductility, facilitate. They will provide large curvature ductility, and obviously this transverse reinforcement extends into the boundary elements as well, which will be used for anchoring the reinforcement of these connecting beams, and these have to be also provided with the similar kind of transverse reinforcement of the same at the same spacing. And once we do this, then of course your building is going to be doing fairly well, and not there will not be any surprises, so to say. So with that, I finish my discussion on the structural walls, and you can refer to IS 13920 and the examples on in our book. And uh, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Any questions? Now or later? And whatever we have discussed, as long as, whatever we have discussed about the philosophy of earthquake resistant design and the mechanical behavior, what we rely on, these same principles apply for steel structures as well, steel buildings as well. For example, we are looking for ductile failure and flexural failure, so to say, and shear failures have to be avoided, and any kind of brittle failure, catastrophic failure has to be avoided. So in case of steel buildings, uh, another complication comes in. I mean, these are very straightforward. The flexural deformations, flexural inelastic capacities have to be built in. And as I said, the plastic hinge concept, plastic hinges have to develop at a distance away from the beam column face. We need to move it away. So how do we do that in case of steel sections? How can we ensure that the plastic hinge forms always in the beam? So that is when we make the beams weaker than the columns, or alternatively, we preferably we make columns stronger than the beams. So that is obvious thing. But then how do we move the plastic hinge location away from the beam column face? Any ideas about that?
सर बीम कॉलम अगर बीम और कॉलम हम लोग जोड़ रहे हैं तो सर जो लैपिंग है वो थोड़ा सा बीम कॉलम फेस से दूर देंगे तो प्रोबेबल फेल्योर वहां हो सकता है
बीम कॉलम से फेस से क्या दूर देंगे? व्हाट विल यू मूव?
सर जैसे हम लोग सर लैपिंग करते हैं ना मतलब फ्लैंज के साथ अगर दूसरे फ्लैंज को मतलब अगर लैप करते हैं या रिवेट्स डालते हैं या बोल्ट्स डालते हैं तो वो सर प्लेट लगा के सर हम लोग थोड़ा दूर में वो बोल्टिंग करेंगे जो मोस्ट प्रोबेबली फेल्योर वहां होना चाहिए
Not really. It happens like this. I mean, if you look at the detail of a beam column junction, then you have one, this beam section coming in. Right, so let's say this is I section and this is the flange, and it frames into the column. So these are the column sections, and again this is another beam section that comes in. So maybe this is H section. So this is for the column, and this is some ISMB. This is also some ISMB section, appropriate ISMB section. And now this junction is either going to be, there are different ways of doing this. We can either have these angles and rivet or bolt, and this is how they are going to be joined together. So the idea is this is again going to be a moment resistant section, so the moment has to be transferred fully. So you can have rigid connections, or you can also have what we call as semi-rigid connections. So in case of rigid connections, it's like moment is completely transferred. In case of semi-rigid connection, uh, some amount of rotation is allowable, but it's not. It's like partial fixity. So there is some amount of rotation allowed for the at the beam column interface, but not completely free. So in both the cases, there is going to be moment which is going to be transferred, and the beam section is of course coming all through up to the column joint. There is no way. I mean, the kind of moments that we have, what you are suggesting there is that we can have a plate here, and then on that plate we can put this beam, and that plate will of course be connected to the web of the beam. That would make that particular connection itself vulnerable, and this plate here, that would be under considerable pressure, and it will yield at that point. So not a very good detail to implement. So this is what it is generally done. I mean, the beam sections, they would be butting against the column face, flanges of the columns, and you would be angling them accordingly. And obviously from outside this range, there would be uh, appropriate location in this on the web of this edge section for the beams to connect from the other side. So now there are two issues with this. How to, two critical things: how to move plastic hinge in beams away from the beam column face, and second one is how to protect the panel zone against high shear demand. High shear demand, and that will lead to web buckling. Panel zone is this beam column junction. Right? This is the panel zone. So as you know, the bending moment is of course going to be of this kind, and this will lead to very high degree of shear in this panel zone. So there will be tension on one side and there will be compression on the other side. So tension is not a problem, but this particular web is a very thin section, and it is particularly vulnerable to buckling, right? So it has to be protected against buckling, and with appropriate stiffeners wherever whatever is required, and it can be protected against buckling, so that very high shear deformations that arise because of the moments, seismic moments, they can be taken care of, and this panel zone does not fail in shear. And I mean, it does not fail in shear and it does not fail in buckling as well. So buckling is a major concern in steel structures. You may have uh, that's an additional dimension that is generally most often not of concern for with respect to reinforced concrete structures, but buckling is a major constraint and it can happen in several ways in case of steel structures. So so first thing, how to move plastic hinge in beams. So this is a very convenient way. Earlier it used to be very difficult. It was very difficult to achieve. We knew what to, I mean, this was desired because uh, as we already mentioned that it is going to be very uh, if the plastic hinges develop at the beam column interface, then it is going to be damaging for the panel zone as well. And to protect the panel zone, it is absolutely essential that plastic hinge development should happen at the uh, at a distance away from the panel zone, beam column face. So one way to do that is, if I look at this ISMB, this is elevation. If I look at the plan, I can reduce the flange section here. Right, so when I do this, the material available at this location is very small, much smaller than the material available at this location, and the plastic hinges will develop at this location. This is a weaker section. I have intentionally made the section weaker than it was originally at other locations. So the capacity here is much more than the capacity here. So the moments, uh, the flexural capacity at this location will be exceeded uh, much earlier than anything can happen here, and plastic deformations will begin to accumulate here, and this is where the plastic hinge will go to progress as it changes the uh, length, this reduced beam. So this is called the reduced beam section. Or RBS. Right, there are various geometries. These geometries of this, there is no need for that to be of only of parabolic region or arc of a circle. It can be straight cuts and kind of trapezoidal cut as well. So there are, and what is the distance away from the uh, panel zone? What is the, how much is to be uh, depth of cut, and what would be the length of cut, and so on. So those are the specifications that you can find in the design codes. What is the appropriate reduction in the beam section for ductile behavior, to encourage ductile behavior in flexural mode. And then another thing that we need to take care of is because of these high moments, there is going to be compression in the flanges, and there may be buckling as well, and that has to be reduced, and some rib stiffeners of course need to be provided to prevent the buckling failure, and Uh, another issue that needs to be taken care of is lateral torsional buckling. When we have large beams, then during the uh, process of deformation, it may happen that the load is not exactly on the plumb line or the center line. It is a little offset, or the alignment is not proper, and then the sections may begin to twist. So that also will add to the shear deformation and the uncertain behavior, and that has to be protected again by using the web stiffeners at appropriate location. So buckling is another major concern. All forms has to be avoided. And then how do we what is the equivalent of structural wall in case of steel structures? So bracing is an effective way for adding strength, stiffness, and ductility to the frame. Now again, if I do the bracing, then one of the major issues is again in case of lateral deformation. So always either one arm is in the compression and the other arm is going to be in the tension bracing. So first of all, this cross bracing is not so easy to achieve because of these flanges. It is not very convenient to have this kind of cross bracing arrangement. Typically what is done is, in the case of steel structure, we generally provide in the chevron configuration. So it is like this. So this is the usual bracing configuration, and if you look at it under the lateral load, one of the brace is always going to be under compression, and while the other one is going to be under tension. And again, any structural element, steel structural element or metal structural element under compression has to be guarded against buckling, and all the member as a whole may buckle, the flanges may buckle, the web may buckle, and buckling will severely restrict the capabilities of the structural system. So what is another issue is it is possible to have build energy dissipation into this kind of system by having a kind of slotted bolted connection. So this frame, instead of having this brace constant one element, we can have this brace as a set of two members. So one half comes from this midpoint at the girder, and another half comes from this, and these are the two faces which are there are slotted slots in this, and there are bolts running through, connecting these faces against each other. And once the frame deforms, then obviously these plates are going to slide against each other, and that will provide damping because of friction in this, and I can have the similar kind of a system in case of in the other arm as well. So this bolt that we provide here, we can control the normal force for facilitating the desired amount of friction in these overlapping plates. And when the deformations happens, the friction at this interface will be able to dissipate a lot of energy in the during vibration. So until the point of no slip, these plates actually work as bracing, providing the stiffness. But after the slip load, the force in these brace elements exceed the slip load that is defined by the coefficient of friction and the normal force on these in these bolts. Then it will be working as a damper, friction damper, and that will add to the uh, energy dissipation capacity of the system. Another mechanism is by having a shear link here. I mean, instead of having these bracings, concentric bracings, we can have a panel here, and one arm can connect at this point and another arm can connect at the other point. And this panel, this shear panel is typically of low yield capacity. It can yield at a much lower level. So when under the influence of this axial lateral deformation, this panel undergoes shear. So this is actually pushing it up and this is pulling it down. So this panel actually undergoes shear deformation like this. And if I have this panel as some kind of low yield material, aluminum or some alloy, then lot of energy can be dissipated during vibration, and at the end of the earthquake we can just remove this panel and replace it with another suitable similar panel, and the structure will be as good as a new structure again. Right? So that's a brief, very quick brief about how do we use structural steel, how do we use these concepts of earthquake resistant design and with the structural sections. And obviously, if we go into details, it will probably take as much time to go into specific details as we have taken for reinforced concrete structures. But the idea was to essentially tell you the basic philosophy behind earthquake resistant design, and the philosophy remains the same for steel structures as well. The only peculiarities of steel structures have to be taken care of. There are certain things that you need to be very careful while dealing with steel structures, particularly the instability issues, buckling and local failure. And of course, there are certain mechanisms in which we can achieve the desired behavior, and some interventions, engineering interventions are required to ensure that the structural framework, steel structural framework behaves in the way that we want the structural system to behave. And typical examples being using a reduced beam section for moving away the plastic zone, plastic hinge zone, then using energy dissipation connections, the structural fuses like aluminum shear links, or even slotted bolted connections for energy dissipation using friction. And all of these are techniques of enhancing the energy dissipation capacities in steel structures. So I'll stop here. If you have any questions. please feel free.